My name's Zachary Blackwood, and I am a senior data engineer at Snowflake, part of the Streamlit team and acquisition. And I want to talk to you today about what it says on the screen, how to hack your way to a better API. Hopefully not to get hacked, but that could be a risk that you face along the way. So I suspect many of you have interesting stories from how you got into data. I don't know how many of the people listening and watching are at what stage in their career, and how many people kind of had this vision that I want to be a data person. I want to do things I want to do machine learning and modeling, or at least I want to do computer science. That was not at all my original plan. I actually began as a teacher, taught high school various things, and eventually couldn't afford to do that anymore, sadly, and so I went into software. And one of the themes that I've noticed throughout my career as I've grown and as I've transitioned is realizing this doesn't seem like it's working great. There's got to be a better way. Even when I started teaching physics, I realized I went in not understanding a lot of fundamental things, even with a physics degree, and so I wanted to do better for my students than I had experienced. And a lot of that shifted into last few years. I want to build better tools for data related stuff. And in particular lately, I want to help build better data apps with working with Streamlit and being at Snowflake, helping to do that. So I do some amount of data engineering on the pipelines and DBT models and things like that. But I get to spend a lot of my time just playing around with Streamlit apps and trying to make things work better, which is a lot of fun and has led me to this topic. I remember very distinctly beginning my very first software job. I was in a small startup, sitting in a room with a bunch of smart people, having done zero professional programming before. And basically, I would spend a few minutes, get stuck on something, and turn around and ask the guy sitting behind me. And there were very smart and very patient and kind people sitting around me. And so I'm sure they got annoyed, but they did answer my questions. And slowly I got to learn more and more things about what we were doing, ask fewer questions or better questions. Eventually I learned there was a way to ask those questions on the internet. And I got slightly better at, look for what is the specific error message or error numbers, things like that. What is the specific software that I'm using? Can I figure out what's actually causing the problem? And I got pretty good at Googling things to find the solution. And for a long time, that was sufficient. But at a few years in, a new coworker came in, and he just seemed to know so many things about the software that we were using. And I had been working with it for a while. And how did you find that out? Oh, well, I read it here. Well, how did you find that out? I read it here. And this is a guy who would actually read. He would read the PEPs for the new Python features coming out, and he would just read the documentation for the tools we were using. And I finally after going to him again and again, realized, oh, I should start doing that. So that became kind of the next stage of my journey as a developer that was slowly moving into the data world somewhat. But the last stage, which is really the thing I want to talk about today, and maybe 90% of you are here, but I hope there's a few of you who maybe are still at stage 2 or 3 here, is I actually realized as someone who's working with software, I can actually dig into the internals of the software that I'm using, of the third-party tools that I'm using, and actually can get a lot of value by doing that. So I want to convince you today that the internals of the software that you're using may be more accessible than you think, and that sometimes messing around with those internals is a good idea. So I want to talk about 2 particular kinds of messing around with internals that have been very interesting and useful to me, particularly in the last few years. And the first one is monkey patching. So monkey patching, besides being an excellent term, is a broadly applicable idea in various dynamic languages where you actually can replace some of the some of the code as your code runs. You can actually replace some piece of code with another piece of code, which turns out to be a pretty handy thing. I think I first was exposed to this idea with writing tests, and oh well, we need to pretend that API works this way, and so just for the context of this test, we're going to swap out a little bit of code to make it do something different. Not hit a server, things like that. So this was a very surprising idea to me. I had no intuition that if I said x dot something equals something else, that it would actually work. But it turns out it did, which is a very interesting thing and opens up a lot of doors. Oftentimes, and maybe you have the same question of, okay, why is this package broken? Or maybe more often, why doesn't it do the thing that I want it to do? Why doesn't it work the way I want it to work? And I need it to work for this particular instance. Before we get too far into the internals, the wonderful thing, if you have either a modern IDE or an ancient IDE with some modern plugins, you can very quickly get access to things like, here's the doc string for this method. You can find out all sorts of things. No, this is very basic kind of thing, but this is where often it all starts, and sometimes it all ends. Like, oh, now I understand why it does what it does. I understand I was using it in the wrong way, or oh, it actually does support it. It just has this extra argument that I didn't realize. And so sometimes that's enough, but not always. Sometimes you really need to start digging in a little deeper. So one of the very handy things about many editors is you can actually go from your reference to a particular method, in this case, to the actual method itself. So with a couple of command clicks, in my case, here is the actual code behind that. And the interesting thing to me is that not is this some abstract representation of the source code as it exists somewhere. This is the actual code that is in my virtual environment that is being run whenever I call this method, which means, of course, that I can just change the code. I could literally go into this file and say, I would like it to work this way. I'm going to edit this file with my editor, and then my code will work. This is not monkey patching, but this is sort of the madman version 1 of it. This code doesn't work the way I want it to. I'm just going to change the code. Of course, maybe this is very obvious to you. It was not obvious until I tried it once. Oh, that's not a good idea, because number one, I now have no documentation about what I changed, and I'm probably going to forget what I did and never going to be able to find it again. And two, the next time I update that package, my beautiful functioning code is gone. So not a good plan, but a pretty cool thing that you can do. And at least digging around and actually looking through the actual source code is a pretty handy thing to do. But if you want to do the slightly saner thing, which is, okay, I have this code, I want it to behave differently. Here's an example of what you can do. So if I'm building a Streamlit app, it has this markdown function that I think is nice, but it really could be a little more exciting. It really could be, I just want to have a little more emphasis, a little more oomph whenever I'm adding some markdown to my app. So I've imported my original code, and I've written this new function, which takes the same arguments as the old one, and manipulates the string that I passed in a little bit, and then some other boring stuff that I don't care too much about, and I just copied from the source code of the old one. The main thing is this line here, and now I can actually replace the old function with my new one by just declaring it to be. This is now going to be this, and like magic, it just changes, and and everything is fine, and now I can use it, and it works the way it should work, which is every time I write something, it yells it out in title in H1 with lots of exclamations. So this is obviously an incredibly useful example, but you can even do more things with monkey patching, and I'll give you another example later. Another wonderful thing that is more open than it seems at first glance is pretty much any website that you use. So if you're not yet familiar with developer tools, find out how to open developer tools in your favorite browser and just start poking around. And it turns out that there's all kinds of information that you get just from opening that up and reloading the page and seeing what happens. You can look in details about all the different elements on the page and what makes those happen. You can see the underlying source code, what's the JavaScript, what's the CSS behind the scenes. You can see what the network traffic is happening, all kinds of exciting things that are exposed to you, even just as a casual user of the website. So that's pretty neat. But even more fun is it's not just websites anymore. Your favorite editor may in fact be a website in disguise. So here's VS Code, and you see that's the same code I was previously editing. And on the right, I have developer tools open, which is you could just open up in VS Code because it's all Electron apps these days. So I can actually see here are the network requests that are being made to populate things, to load plugins, and various things like that. And while we're at it, it's not just editors. Your instant messaging program may well also be a website under the scenes, under the covers. So in this case, you don't get it for free. You have to pass an extra environment variable. But once you've passed that environment variable, once you've set that environment variable, now we can explore Slack as a website, which is of course exactly what it is. It's just a JavaScript app, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just like I guess everything is these days. So here is the general channel from a couple weeks ago, and here are the network calls that are being made, and there's quite a lot of them. So all right, so what can you actually do with that as the most obvious thing that you can do, which my students were very thrilled whenever I showed them that they could do this, was, oh, I can change any website to look any way that I want. They thought it was really cool that they could go to the school website that showed their grades and show it to their parents after they had handily edited it. So of course you can do that. You can play around. It's very helpful for tweaking designs and things like that if you're actually building a website. But more interesting to me and more practical for a lot of my work is the network tab. So this is a particular request from the normconf Slack. And this is one particular request. I hope I chopped off enough of the tokens so that you can't impersonate me, but oh well. So this is a request to get and I particularly like the everyone and not bots and not apps. So apparently this is to populate the list of who is in this channel. And I think this is the general channel. And I now not only see that this request was made and have the ability to see, okay, here's the parameters that were passed, but Developer Tools gives me this very wonderful thing, which is I can copy it. I can copy it, not just like copy the URL, but copy all of the details behind it so that I could replay that. And in my terminal, I can run a curl command to rerun that exact query with all of the cookies and everything set so that it just works until my token expires and things like that. But for now, I could rerun that and get that data out as a curl command. Maybe you love Unix kind of tools like curl. I personally don't have I love that they work and they're simple, but I often prefer to bring them into something I'm a little more familiar with. So there's probably several tools like this, but one that I like is curl converter, which allows you to take a curl command and convert it into the language of your choice. So here's that specific request turned into Python with a little bit of details stripped out. But this is now a functioning Python script that will return a response object that I can then, get it as JSON or whatever I want. And it just works. And now I can do programmatic things like maybe I really do want to see bots. Maybe whatever. Maybe I want to see what apps are loaded in this channel, or I just want to, make a cool contact list of all the cool people who are in the general channel in normconf. So it turns out this is oftentimes a good way to work with a website or an app disguised as a website. I had a friend in another Slack group ask about, hey, is there a good, anybody know any good packages for scraping the Jenkins API? And I responded very cheekily with requests. And it turned out it actually was a pretty good option. So oftentimes, just a simple ability to make arbitrary requests and take the actual network requests that are being made and turn them into code turns out to be really useful. So I want to talk about two real world ways that I've used this kind of digging into internals. One particular one happened a few months ago, and we had this situation where we had all this data that was being collected in a Datadog, and it was really useful for alerting engineers when something happened. But we wanted to store it in a more long-term place. We wanted to put it in our warehouse so that we could have it for queries later and see how things were happening over time. And there wasn't a real straightforward, obvious way that I could find to do this. So a colleague and I worked on a way to do this. And one of the first things that he actually found was Datadog has this wonderful UI in their website for building these queries and building up these monitors. And then they even give you a export as curl, which is just a really wonderful thing. It really encourages this kind of use this other places reusability. It's a very nice feature. And so that immediately gave us what we wanted. Almost, we really wanted it to be able to a little more programmatic than just the raw curl request. It turns out they also have a nice Python API to wrap around those curl commands, and you can basically take the query part of it and slap it into this Python library, and you get out something that, and you have type hints and all that niceness because the library knows what it returns. But used it. Sometimes it worked, but I found a case where it didn't work. It was complaining that it was expecting a string and it was throwing a validation error because it was receiving a Boolean. I was very sure, as far as I could tell, things were set up right on the Datadog side. It really was supposed to be a Boolean. I think I was using the wrapper right. Very possibly I wasn't, but as far as I could tell, I was. And I need to get around this error. So what did I do? Monkey patch it. And it turned out to be as simple as here's the old version of the method. Here's my new version of the method, which has the same arguments, and it returns the old version, except in this case, and it just skips the validation. Is that a great idea? It worked, and it solved my problem. And I knew for sure I was smarter than this validator, that this really was supposed to be Boolean. So it worked out okay. And then I just slapped that in, and ta-da, everything worked great. Other than that, no issues. One other example of this is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm on the part of the Streamlit data team. I don't work on the Streamlit core, but we use Streamlit a lot. So we build a lot of apps for seeing how are things going in the ecosystem. Are people using it? Are people using the new features? And we tend to, get the bleeding edge of the latest and greatest features and get real excited. And we were so excited when the native multi-page app feature, you get this nice sidebar with all the different pages. It changes your URL. We could throw out the old radio button based one. But as soon as I started using it, I realized, oh, well, you get this, this boring file icon, but you can put emojis in, just like we had in our radio button version, but you have to put emojis in the file name. And trust me, I could not stomach putting emojis in my file name. It hurt my soul too deeply to allow this to be the way. And so I had to find a hack. So looked around in the Python source code and found this method that's being called to generate that sidebar, which is called getPages. And lo and behold, it returns this dictionary that is a global variable that is cached, which means that if I make a new method that calls that getPages method, empties out the dictionary and replaces it item by item with what I want it to be, with whatever icon and whatever path and whatever name I'd like to get those pages, and then call this internal method, it just works. And so I could very nicely have my sidebar, have my cake and eat it too, with just a little extra method. This isn't technically a monkey patch. I'm not actually replacing the code, but in the sense that I'm digging into the internals, using things that may not be advisable to use. All right, this is my goal with this. You've learned over the years to use Google, to read the docs, use Chat GPT, and I hope I've convinced you that sometimes it's a good idea to dig into the internals and make your own API.